Happy healing justice, my good people. My name is Kymani Jade, Kymani Jade for short, and you've tuned into More Lyrical. I am bringing to you honest, transparent, truth-tellingly free conversations on mental health in the spirit of healing justice. A lot of people have been asking me, Kim, just what exactly is healing justice? So let's talk about it. For starters, healing itself requires that we pay attention to our whole body, that being our psychological, our physical, our spiritual, our emotional, even our ecological selves, our connection to the environment and the land. Healing justice is a term that was coined by Kara Page, the founder of the Kindred Southern Healing Justice Collective, a network of political healers, health practitioners, and organizers in the southeast of the U.S., namely Detroit, Michigan. Healing justice identifies how we can holistically respond to and intervene on the generational trauma and cycle of violence that impact BIPOC communities, that being Black, Indigenous, people of color, or people of culture, as we've recently been known to be called. It is about bringing collective practices to impact and transform the consequences of oppression on our bodies, our hearts, and our minds. When we talk about these social justices that relate specifically to our well-being, things can get confusing. So there's healing justice, there's emotional justice, there's restorative justice and transformative justice, which are oftentimes used synonymously, but they in fact all do differ. And I want to talk a little bit about what those distinctions are to clarify what exactly healing justice is. Ghanaian award-winning host and journalist Esther Armah coined the term emotional justice. Emotional justice has to do with the process of remedying untreated intergenerational trauma for Black people. Now, this is where things divide a bit. Armah speaks to the core problem being the lack of acknowledgement of whatever pain or offense that is inflicted on Black people. She speaks to the fact that victims have to endure the violence of said crime or harm that has been committed, and then also get through the pain of never having that recognized, whether that be in the courts, within the judicial system, or in their own communities. So emotional justice is about naming and addressing these traumas. It's about finding the language to articulate exactly what these traumas are, that they are real. It's about finding and creating the language to describe these traumas, making space for that, and then dealing with it by developing a counter narrative. So emotional justice, again, is about naming and addressing the traumas that have historically been inflicted on Black people, and then developing a counter narrative. So whereas healing justice is about collective practices, emotional justice is about counter narratives. Now, restorative justice and transformative justice are often used interchangeably, but they are nuanced in their analysis of trauma and how harm is committed within a community, and more importantly, how it should be addressed. Restorative and transformative justice are alternatives to the punitive justice that our judicial systems traditionally operate under. Restorative justice, for example, is presented as an option to incarceration. We want to think about restoring the community and healing whatever harm was committed to a person or persons within a community. The person who created the harm is then made to give back to the community in order to restore it. Restorative justice is distinct in that it holds individuals accountable, but it doesn't quite examine the systems of oppression that are in place and are the root cause of these dilemmas. It focuses more on individual interventions. A lot of restorative justice or RJ practices have pulled from indigenous traditions. And so it's really important that we honor that in the process. When we think about restorative justice, we think about restorative justice circles or healing circles, talking circles. Not only that, but mediation, community service, and anger management classes, resources for the person who was harmed, so forth and so on. Transformative justice wants to know, why was the crime even committed? It asks for the root cause of the problem. It looks at the behavior and investigates the issue, considering that someone who does harm can also be someone who was harmed. What makes transformative justice really stand out is that it challenges the status quo. Its focus is less on individual interventions and more about systemic transformation. Transformative justice stems from an abolitionist framework. It imagines beyond the current systems, and it confronts the conditions that even make harm possible. I was reading an article that interviewed proponents of healing justice who are doing healing justice work, and Ricardo Morales made an excellent analogy, which I connected to the difference between restorative justice and transformative justice. He stated that healers practice within a larger community ecosystem, and that ecosystem is multi-leveled. He said, it's the difference between horticulture and agriculture. Horticulture I liken to restorative justice, whereas agriculture I think is more like transformative justice, in that horticulture is about nurturing individual plants, whereas agriculture, we take care of the soil so that plants can thrive. Restorative and transformative justice. So when we look back through all of these various lenses of justice, remember, healing justice is about collective practices. Emotional justice is about counter narratives. Restorative justice is about individual interventions, and transformative justice is about systemic transformations. And in my opinion, we deserve them all to reimagine a world and a society that serves us all. But bringing it back to healing justice, what also makes healing justice stand out is that it lifts up resiliency and survival practices, which I like to call life practices. Healing justice acknowledges that self-care and collective care are part of liberation work. It is part of the organizing. It is part of activism. Healing is political. Healing is power. For Black, Indigenous, and people of culture, intergenerational and historical trauma shape our experience, and so does our ancestral resilience. And it's important that we remember that and tap into that in all of our liberation work. What's also unique to healing justice work is that historically, it's been led by Black people, people of color, and Indigenous people, and also queer and trans people and the disabled community. And this is deliberate, intentional, and on purpose. Healing justice is fundamentally a form of resistance against the displacement and co-optation of our traditional healing practices and the criminalization of our healing practitioners. It speaks to how the histories of science and even medicine have acted in collusion with colonization and the harms that this has caused. The amount of experiments and medical procedures that were and still are forced upon Black, Indigenous, and people of culture. Healing justice works to interrogate this and decolonize these practices. There are a number of principles within healing justice, and it's constantly evolving. Some of those that stand out most to me is that healing justice is about the healing power of pleasure, of listening, creating spaces that are a majority of people of color and Native people for healing, creating from a place of the belief in the wholeness of disability and the interdependence of disabled people within the movement. Essentially, there can be no healing justice without disability justice. It speaks to queer and trans and two-spirited people as necessary in their presence and brilliance. It draws on a lineage of ancestors and healers. It focuses on building and maintaining relationships to the land as part of our healing. It challenges fat phobia, welcomes feminist and womanist practices. It necessitates sustainability as a political practice. And it acknowledges that not everybody sees themselves as healers, but they too are worthy. It is sex positive, and it honors that the process is the product. Treating each other with tenderness and love and dignity is part of the process. There will be mistakes and things will take way longer than we could have thought, but we make room for that. We make space for the unknown. For a lot of us, when we think about activism or liberation work, we think with such a sense of urgency that we don't always make time for healing ourselves in that process. There's so much focus on the struggle, and activists and organizers who've been doing this work for years have named they hurt people, and in turn they hurt themselves because of where they are still healing. And that's the thing about oppression. It demands that there's a separation of the self from the self, and community from community, a separation from community, a separation from land, and a separation from our spirits. Some of you may be wondering, so how do I integrate healing justice into my daily practices of self-care and collective care? How do I integrate it into my organizing? What does it look like in direct action? Excellent questions. We can incorporate healing justice before, during, and after direct action. It's about taking care of ourselves and taking care of each other. When we're organizing and when we're facilitating workshops online and virtually, when we are attending community board and school board meetings, when we are canvassing, and when we are at the dinner table with our family and friends, we can embody the principles of healing justice. And here are some ways how we can do so in direct action in particular. A lot of times we're focused on the targets, we're focused on the logistics and exactly what needs to get done. And so we forget about our full selves. We forget about our psychological, emotional, and spiritual needs. And so before we even begin this work, it's important that we center ourselves, that we ground ourselves so that we can begin to self-identify our moods, the anxiety, the sadness, the depression that may be taking over our bodies and impacting the way that we can connect and relate to each other, how we engage in our meetings, and how these feelings and behaviors and emotions begin to shape our actions. And this shows up in either physical or emotional manifestations. So I was checking out the Black Lives Matter Healing Justice Toolkit, and I came across a lot of excellent recommendations. Grounding exercises can look like breath work, taking time to breathe deeply and understand the science of breath. It can be a body scan, thinking of where the pain exists in your body. Is there tension in your neck, in your lower back? Taking a scan of your full body. It can also look like collective chanting or chanting to yourself. It can be as simple as a check-in before things begin. How are you? What's your day like? What's your morning been like? How's your day been? And really and truly caring about the answer, caring about connecting to one another as part of the mission of your work. We must remember to center and reaffirm the vision for that work. It's also important that we organize community support and resources. A lot of times that looks like the hydration of your people, and that food is provided, that you commune together and eat together as well. When we fight for food justice also looks like, have you ate for the day? It looks like coordinating food drop-offs, but also coordinating that counselors, body workers, and other social workers are either on site during a direct action or available afterwards. Ensuring that there are people whose specific role and position is to check in on the collective mood of the group. Is there any tension or conflict between the leaders that may need to be handled then and there, or it needs to be addressed immediately after? Healing justice must be at the center of how we work with one another. And so after any direct action, we're thinking about how can we process as a group? What are the things that came up for people? How are people feeling? Really and truly, that's even more important than addressing what worked and what didn't work. Asking what's going on for you is the beginning of not only self-reflection, but also accountability. And it's really important, whether it's individual trauma or vicarious trauma, that we begin to do the individual work of processing where our vulnerabilities lie and confronting that. That is the difference of selfish self-care and self-care for the collective. Really focusing on healing ourselves so that we can be better for our communities and our people. Healing justice is about considering what is it that we can implement to more deeply build trust, relationship, and care into the foundation of our work. Healing justice asks us to consider how the systems of oppression that we seek to change outside of ourselves, outside of our bodies, also exists inside of our bodies. Some of what else I've read identifies that the systems of care within Western medicine that we deeply depend upon are also part of the systems of oppression and dominance that we seek to transform. And we know and must recognize that for Black people, brown people, and indigenous people, our traditional systems of healing practice have been disappeared, in many cases violently so. And today they're being repackaged and fed to us as new age science by people outside of the indigeneity of these practices and cultural traditions. And that is key to remember. So when you think about healing justice, think about your whole body and your full self. Think about your psyche, your ancestral connection and reverence, your psychological, emotional, spiritual, physical, and environmental connection, and what it means to tap into all of these, not only for yourselves, but in community, for community. Thank you for watching, everyone. I really hope that you take some time to check out the description box down below for more resources on exactly what healing justice is, how you can get involved and integrate it into the practices of your organization. I hope that you've enjoyed this video, and if you have, remember to like it, share it, and don't forget to subscribe and click on the notification bell down below so that you are the first to check out my upcoming videos. All right, family, I am wishing you healing, tenderness, and abundant love. Peace, peace, people.